offering solidarity. The Holy Father calls on U.S. bishops after the death of George Floyd. Saying goodbye. The first memorial service for Mr. Floyd is in Minneapolis today. More spending. Congress passes more coronavirus aid and also takes on police brutality. We're on Capitol Hill. And a little different, how the ordination of 2 priests looked as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 4th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight, the White House sees signs of progress. An American held in Iran is freed. Protesters are calmer. More businesses closed by the pandemic are reopening. The stock market is surging. And there is even some positive news on the jobs front. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening. Here at the White House tonight, President Trump is welcoming home Michael White from Iran after nearly 700 days.
Michael White out of Iran following months of quiet negotiations. President Donald Trump tweeting, "I am happy to announce that Navy veteran Michael White, who has been detained by Iran for 683 days, is on a Swiss plane that just left Iranian airspace. We expect him to be home with his family in America very soon."
What a great day for this country. What a great day for Michael White. And this president has been focused on bringing people home since he got in office.
Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, early Thursday morning, protesters calling out, "March with us." And President Trump's first defense secretary, Jim Mattis, slamming his former boss in an essay in The Atlantic, saying in part, "Militarizing our response, as we witnessed in Washington, D.C., sets up a conflict, a false conflict, between the military and civilian society." President Trump responded on Twitter by calling Mattis the world's most overrated general, glad he is gone. Current Defense Secretary Mark Esper went on record Wednesday saying now's not the time to invoke the Insurrection Act.
We are not in one of those situations now.
The remarks reportedly upset President Trump and raised questions if he still has confidence in his Pentagon chief.
We've had this conversation with y'all many times, and I know there's a lot of back and forth on these issues, but the President and the Secretary of Defense met yesterday, and as you know, when the President loses confidence, if he loses confidence, you'll know about it.
Also tonight, the number of U.S. workers filing for unemployment benefits has eased for the 9th straight week. The White House continues to monitor the pandemic situation, looking for flare-ups, and the U.S. has just sent more ventilators to Russia. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Owen. Pope Francis calls the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference to convey his prayers and solidarity with Americans during this period of national unrest. One day after the Holy Father condemned racism, the Pope spoke to Archbishop Jose Gomez of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. The Archbishop says Pope Francis is praying for the church in Minneapolis. The Pope also thanked the bishops for their pastoral tone of their response to the protest. The first of several memorial services to honor the life of George Floyd took place today in Minneapolis.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?
Civil rights leaders, politicians, and even celebrities from around the country joined Floyd's family in mourning his loss and acknowledging the broader meaning he is assumed in death. As the service took place a few blocks away, a judge set bail at a minimum of $750,000 and as much as $1 million each for the 3 fired Minneapolis police officers charged with aiding and abetting murder in Floyd's death. Congressional Democrats are preparing a sweeping package of police reforms. This as pressure builds for a federal response to the death of George Floyd. Correspondent Eric Rosales reports from Capitol Hill. Eric?
Well, Tracy, lawmakers are grappling with how to respond to days of protest. They tell EWTN that they want to come up with some real change that will make a difference. Under the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus, some of the proposals, the ideas that they're thinking about, grant money to improve police training and to ban the use of chokeholds.
Prayers for justice ring out on Capitol Hill. for our leaders, local and national, enlighten them with the wisdom and courage to address injustice where it resides.
Use our senators to make the weak strong.
With protesters in D.C. gathering outside the Capitol Wednesday, Republican Senator Marco Rubio assured them, "Please know those inside could hear you, but change will require listening." One Democrat is asking protesters to hear her message.
I think it's really time to go back to normal. I think the points of protest have been made.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are working on police reform legislation.
What's necessary here is to empower and enable more professional, less excessive force by police officers.
Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal says the country needs police training and education and a national registry of officers who've been charged and convicted of police brutality.
We're going to be having a hearing in the Judiciary Committee to stop the militarization of our nation that is a threat to not only peaceful protest, but all of our liberties.
But there's a wide perception among people of color, fear of the cops. And we got to get to the bottom of that and not just talk about it, but bring about corrective action.
Lawmakers are also calling for an end to the use of anonymous federal law enforcement officers during recent protests in cities like D.C.
We need to make sure that every single person that is involved in security from the federal government is identified.
Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy renewed calls to end remote work. He said that the nation needs to heal, come together, and he also said that the nation needs its Congress back in Washington, D.C. Tracy.
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Eric. The Senate passed a bill yesterday extending the Paycheck Protection Program. The bill lengthens the window of time for businesses to use subsidized funds from 8 weeks to 24 weeks while still qualifying for loan forgiveness. It also eases some restrictions for participating in the program and now heads to the president's desk for his signature. A second man is accusing a bishop in Brooklyn, New York, of sexual abuse. The diocese is already investigating Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio for alleged sexual abuse, and now another man is claiming that he was abused back in the 1970s when the bishop was a parish priest at Holy Rosary Church in Jersey City. Bishop DiMarzio has denied all the allegations. China is tightening its grip on Hong Kong, but some protesters defied a police ban and broke through barricades to mark today's 31st anniversary of the crushing of the democracy movement in Tiananmen Square.
It is an activity to commemorate the ones who sacrificed in the June 4th incident, who are being oppressed by the Chinese regime.
Students at the University of Hong Kong held a moment of silence today. They gathered in front of the Pillar of Shame sculpture to remember those who died on this day back in 1989 in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Chaos inside the Hong Kong legislature again today. Lawmakers passed the controversial law that makes it a crime to insult the Chinese national anthem. Violators face 3 years in prison. Today's debate follows last week's approval by the National Parliament in Beijing to approve a national security law for Hong Kong.
실제로 살포된 전단의 대부분은
South Korea's unification minister is pushing new laws to stop people from flying balloons carrying leaflets over the border with North Korea. Earlier this morning, the sister of leader Kim Jong-un threatened to cut off military ties with South Korea if the leaflets do not stop. Defectors regularly send balloons carrying messages across the border to North Koreans. The Prime Minister of Britain is launching an international effort to find a vaccine for COVID-19.
I'm delighted to welcome you to this virtual global vaccine summit and what I hope will be a real moment when the world comes together, uniting humanity in the fight against disease. That is our mission today.
Boris Johnson expects leaders from more than 50 countries to join the Global Vaccine Summit. It aims to raise funds for a United Nations alliance in order to get vaccines to developing countries. A suspect is named in the disappearance of a British girl from Portugal 13 years ago. Madeleine McCann was just 3 years old when she went missing while on vacation with her family in 2007. Today, police in Germany say a man in prison for a sex crime was in that area at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. They're asking anyone who was there at the time if they remember seeing a blonde man driving a Volkswagen camper van.
Coming up, a diocese in Wisconsin considers taking county and city officials to court if churches are not allowed to reopen under the same rules as stores.
Attorneys representing the Diocese of Madison say they will file suit if parishes in the diocese are not permitted to operate at the same capacity as retail outlets. The letter to county and city officials from law firms, including the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, states in part, quote, "This unequal and unfair treatment violates the church's cherished constitutional freedoms and, more importantly, hobbles unconscionably its pastoral mission." Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Bishop Donald J. Hying of the Diocese of Madison. Your Excellency, that is, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, Your Excellency, under the county's reopening guidelines, houses of worship are being limited to 50 people regardless of the building's capacity, with threats of fines of up to more than $1,000 for every instance in which more than 50 people gather for Mass. What's the impact of this, and what's it going to have on the church?
It's just a little bit of history. After the state Supreme Court struck down the governor's directives, the emergency order number 2 from the county allowed us to be at 25% capacity of building occupancy. So in good faith, we went forward with that plan for all of our 11 counties. The other 10 counties have no restrictions whatsoever. So we came up with a plan that was very careful, very safe, very prudent. And then the day we issued our plan, the next day they came out with executive order number 3, which reversed that and limited in Dane County to only 50 people in each site. So we have the situation where there are parishes with 1,200 seating capacity limited to 50 people. So we simply want to be treated like every other organization in the county.
Yeah, places of worship are the only category capped by a specific number rather than general capacity restrictions. Retail establishments, on the other hand, are permitted to operate at 25% capacity. What kind of message do you think this sends?
The message that we understand is that, we're limited in our capacity to celebrate Mass, which is our central activity as Catholics. The Sunday Mass for us is everything. So other businesses are able to operate their fundamental function at 25%. We're not asking for special treatment. We're simply asking to be treated the same as everyone else. That for our essential function, which is Sunday Eucharist, that we can be at 25% in Dane County, as we are asking the other 10 counties of the diocese to observe in a safe, prudent, and careful way as we gradually reopen.
Yeah, and this has been such a difficult time for so many people, making the outreach of the church even more essential than ever. Can you talk about how the restrictions have impacted the church's outreach and also what you've done to adjust?
Yeah, as for all of us, these past 12 weeks have been very difficult. Without Sunday Mass, without the ability for our people to gather. Through all these weeks, we've kept our parishes open, and our priests have been heroic in offering confessions, times for Eucharistic adoration, time for personal prayer. As we're gradually reopening, again, we're trying to do what we can in tandem with everyone else so that we safely, prudently reopen, but very aware that we need Mass. The world needs God, and we need the healing power of Christ's love, especially when we look at all the dissension, violence, and injustice that's engulfed our country. We've never needed Sunday Mass more than right now, and that's what we're trying to do.
Your Excellency, quickly, I don't have much time, but I'm curious, do you think that there will be a resolution to this without litigation? And also, what would be your message to county and city officials there in Madison?
I'm prayerfully hopeful that they will take seriously our request and look at the reasons for acceding to our request, which is very logical and reasonable. My message to them is simply that, to look at what we're asking and realize that what we're asking is no different than what's being allowed for other organizations. And certainly my prayers are with them. In no way do I mean to be conflictual or challenging with this. If we can resolve this quietly, I'd be the first person wanting to do that.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Bishop Donald
you,
J.
Tracy.
Hying of the Diocese of Madison. Thank you again. Well, 3 out of 5 Americans say that they are lonely. That is according to a study conducted by Cigna in January. The study was released just before almost every country in the world was forced to lock down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Matthew Ford, British historian and researcher at LUMSA University in Rome, has come up with a solution for the church to combat loneliness, and he joins us now. Matthew, welcome to the program. I know you describe loneliness as an epidemic, and we are now physically living in an epidemic, rather pandemic as well. How has this added to people's feelings of loneliness?
Well, I mean, this COVID-19 experience, I mean, let's hope that it's a dark cloud that has a silver lining. My hope is that this mass quarantine, this mass isolation of people, in particular in Western societies, will make people much more aware of a parallel pandemic that's been intensifying in recent decades, which is isolation caused not by healthcare regulations, but by dysfunctional cultural conditions, often of a post-Christian character. So I hope that after this crisis, when there's a great deal of reflection on what COVID-19 has meant, that there will be a raising of consciousness amongst people about the problems of loneliness and isolation in Western societies, because a great deal of people will have experienced this because of this quarantine when they didn't experience it before.
Matthew, can you talk about the cultural and societal impact of loneliness?
People seem increasingly to find themselves in a situation where they have to endure loneliness being imposed upon them against their will. And so here there's a really big question. What has brought about this desocialization of human beings in Western societies in the last 50 years? And I think here we can pose the question, what has been the consequences of de-Christianization? Because the loss of Christian culture has also been a very marked feature of the last 50 years in Western societies. Because as we know, in the book of Genesis, God says it is not good that man should be alone. And I think now, in this very critical period, that Christians are particularly called to act in this sphere, which is why I've proposed this new form of pastoral care for loneliness. Firstly, of course, because Christ instructed us to care for the afflicted, but he also said that he would be present in the afflicted. So therefore, when we're helping the lonely, we're helping him. And this is why I say in my book how beautiful it would be if after our deaths, Christ could say to us, I was lonely, I suffered because of this, but you kept me company.
Oh, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. We appreciate it. Matthew Ford, British historian and researcher at LUMSA University in Rome. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Up next, how COVID-19 affected the ordination of new priests. We are getting a look at two paintings just unveiled by the Vatican museums that are believed to be painted by Renaissance master Raphael. The frescoes had not been attributed to Raphael until extensive research during the restoration of the Vatican's Hall of Constantine. Two women representing justice and friendship decorate the walls of the hall. Researchers say the paintings were done by Raphael right before his death in 1520. An ordination of a priest normally means a church full of family and friends and well-wishers, but with the COVID-19 restrictions, things looked a little different in Newark, New Jersey this past Saturday. Two Franciscan friars of the Renewal were ordained in an almost empty church. EWTN News correspondent Colin Flynn brings us that story.
Today is a very special day for two Franciscan friars of the Renewal, as here at the Most Blessed Sacrament Friary in Newark, New Jersey, Brother Oisin Emmanuel Martin from Dublin, Ireland, and Brother Malachy Joseph Napier from Georgia in the United States are about to become priests.
The first time I ever heard the call, actually, I was 18 years old. It's quite unexpected experience in church at one point, and some seminarians shared their testimony. And I wasn't really into my faith so much, but my family was, so I was there. And I just heard the Lord in my heart call me and ask, would you be willing to be a priest for me too?
Today is their ordination, and for both Oisin and Malachy, the journey to priesthood has been a long time coming.
The most important thing, I think, is the Lord forming my heart, allowing me at times to have my own way and desires so I could see the full futility of that. And then realizing, as Bishop Manning beautifully said, God is enough.
On an occasion like this, the church would normally be packed with family and friends, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the gathering has been limited to 10 people.
Let those to be ordained priests come forward. Brother Oisin Emmanuel Martin, CFR. Brother Malachy Joseph Napier, CFR.
Most Reverend Father, Holy Mother Church asks you to ordain these men, our brothers, to the responsibility of the priesthood.
We choose these, our brothers, for the order of the priesthood.
Thanks be to God.
It meant so much, man. I can't really put that into words. To see their faces, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my mother and father, their faith, their love for me. And to have one of my brothers here, it gave me so much consolation and joy.
Exhilarated, and it feels surreal. You're used to a certain flow of things, but this was just exceptionally personal, intimate, and prayerful, and anointed.
Father Oisin and Father Malachy are excited for what's next to come.
I mean, I'm going to be missioned down to Nicaragua, so I'll be in the foreign missions, and that's going to be super sweet. And we'll see what God has, you know? I mean, part of the adventure has been learning that I can't actually presume anything. The goal I've realized is like, it's not to try and figure it out, it's just simply to follow.
God, with your fire, new wine and new wineskins, fill our hearts, God, with your fire.
Gratitude to go back to my own country, and just the reality of so many people that I know and love, and so many others that don't know that God is real, don't know that they can experience His love, don't know how many false forms of happiness they've seized upon. So going just to be His servant and seeking to serve those He puts across my path, and just trying to stay close to the Lord and the Holy Spirit.
And outside the monastery, Father Malachy and Father Oisin give their first blessings as newly ordained priests. In Newark, New Jersey, Colin Flynn, EWTN News Nightly.
And you can see an extended version of Colin's story right now on our EWTN News Nightly Facebook page. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.